Resources are right here then, right? Between Dr. Maxwell and Dr. Wilson.
Yeah.
It's surprising what you've been able to find there. So you've got the results, and now you want to take some action. And you put the sign up. How did you get the sign? I was looking at when I read about the sign, I was expecting something that would be pretty basic, and it was a very professional looking sign, well built, well lettered, all of that sort of thing.
Yep. So we went to, I'm not really sure where, me and Mom went to a store just in town and got it made.
Oh, okay. So
Yep.
yeah, professionally done.
Yep.
And then that starts to attract some attention, right?
Oh yes, it did. I had a lot of people, neighbors included, calling me asking me what the sign was and what it meant. So I had quite a few newspaper articles and radio calling me to ask me about this sign and what it really meant. And when I told them and kind of explained my project further, they were really interested in it too.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because the situation doesn't change. The water is just as dirty after you put the sign up as it was before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting. So that situation has been the same for a long, long time. And your sign goes up, and suddenly what you really have done is to start to educate people who didn't even know they had a problem, and now suddenly realize that they do have a fairly serious problem.
Yeah, things won't get fixed if you don't talk about it. So you really have to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room that needed to be discussed, and it got discussed, and now there's things happening to fix it.
Yeah, yeah. And the people who had been paying attention would be people like Dr. Maxwell, but nobody was really thinking that was all that serious or something. Yeah?
I'm not really sure why. I think it would be more shocking to have a little kid telling you that there's an issue that you should have taken on so long ago.
Well, yes, yes. And I was noticing that Greta Thunberg at COP24, the young Swedish woman, was saying, since the leaders are acting childishly, the children will have to lead. She didn't put it quite that way, but it was close to that sort of phrasing. Yeah. So that becomes somewhere along in here, you get a call about Lunenburg Harbor. So you're becoming a bit of a consulting scientist here, right?
Yeah. So I read in the paper, or Mom showed me a paper that was a man who has a boat. He has boat tours out in Lunenburg. And he was complaining about the sludge that was on his boat every morning, this thick sludge right next to the outflow pipe from the treatment plant. So I was kind of curious to see what the levels were in Lunenburg. So without even contacting him, we just kind of went in and tested for our own curiosity. And we got our results back, and they were awful. And people, it's a harbor, it's our main attraction, it's Lunenburg, it's beautiful, and the levels were awful. So after I posted that, there were some people that weren't too happy about it, and I just kind of walked away from that situation altogether.
Well, yeah, because the mayor wasn't too terribly happy, right? The mayor sort of thought they were doing everything right, and how bad were they compared to, say, Bridgewater?
Bridgewater? They were probably about the same as Bridgewater, maybe a little worse. It was very high levels, very bad. Not good for a beautiful town.
And that's coming out of a sewage treatment plant, isn't it?
Yeah, I kind of backed away from that, so I don't know all the details, but I just kind of let Lunenburg figure it out themselves because I'm focusing on this river.
Now, the next thing that happens is they actually start to fix it, right?
Yeah.
And so then we have $1 million donor comes out of we don't know where exactly, and has $1 million to spend on helping to clean up the river. How did that work, and do we have any idea who it was?
We have no idea who it was, and it's to help cover the loans. So whoever it was, it's greatly appreciated, and it's a huge amount of money for our community.
And it's a flexible thing, which is nice. That they're not. It's money that doesn't have to go through a whole bunch of hoops or applications and so on and so forth. It's money they can use just as they need to kind of grease the machine and get it going.
Exactly. Yeah.
Isn't that great? Oh.
It is great.
So so that's 1 million, but there's still 14.7, and where does that come from?
The $15.7 million was from the Build Canada Fund, so it's a fund of money for Canada, and our community applied for it, and we received it.
That's an amazing result. What does it cover the whole LaHave watershed, or like how far out are the boundaries of where that money is being spent? Do you know?
It's from Bridgewater to the ocean from here.
Okay, so up above, isn't part of it.
So there are 600 pipes to be fixed.
Other kids, if you were, and you have been talking to other kids, right?
I have been, yes, quite a bit.
What do you do? What do you say to them? What's your message to other kids?
My main message is that kids can make a difference, and that your age shouldn't define what you can and cannot do. It doesn't define what you can and cannot do. And I kind of preach that all the time. I say it more than once. I really want to show kids that it doesn't have to be water is what they take on. It could be anything else. Just that you can be powerful. It doesn't matter what your age is.
I was curious, when you say it doesn't have to be water, yes, there are lots of other problems. And basically you're saying to kids, just go for it, right?
Exactly. If you fall, just kind of get back up and try again.
Are you frustrated that so many of these problems are still there, that your generation is having to deal with stuff that was a problem in my generation, right?
Yeah, it is a little frustrating. I'm hoping that we can help fix the world.
And there's an energy that seems to come from young people here just at this point, almost as though people have gotten fed up. They've had, they look around and say, all these problems and nothing is happening, which I guess is more or less what you felt here.
Exactly, and now with the use of social media, the message can get out further than just a community. And like my project, I just went to Sweden, which is crazy, and I wouldn't have done that without social media. So it's definitely a huge component.
Yeah, that sort of stitches the world together, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Tell me about Sweden, because I'm not sure I understood what that was all about. But how did you get to be going to Sweden?
I got to go to Sweden. So there was a lady, Jenny, who came down to work with Blue Nose Coastal Action Foundation. She works at the World Maritime University in Sweden. So she came down and we kind of got together, we talked, and she said that it would be a really cool opportunity if I go to Sweden and talk to classes about my project. So we got an email a couple months later and she said, hey, the offer still stands if you want to come to Sweden. We can arrange it. So we talked further, and then I ended up in Sweden and I was in classes talking about my project. And I showed kids how to do testing, which was really fun. I got to see all the smiles on the kids' faces, and it's really cool to show them that science isn't just a textbook.
That's a big obstacle, isn't it? That science is, people think science is something that's distant and that ordinary people can't do, and you're living proof that citizen scientists can do a lot.
Yeah, definitely, and that it can be fun. It's not a hard process what I do, and it's a lot of fun.
I was going to ask you about that. How difficult was that? Because you were only 11, right, at the beginning of all of this, but you're out there doing the projects. What do you have to actually physically do?
So you have to go in the water with the bottle on the end of a long pole with your rubber boots and get a sample, which isn't rocket science. It's pretty simple. But your bottle's sterilized, so Mom would do that part with a pressure cooker because it's a little dangerous for me to do at 11. Then we bring it home and run it through a filter funnel, and then the filter goes onto a enterococci testing card, which then goes into an incubator for 36 hours. So I definitely made a few mistakes along the way, but after a while I got the hang of it.
But the process isn't essentially all that tremendously difficult. It's
No, it isn't.
complicated.
No.
What's an incubator? Is it just a little heated chamber of some kind?
Yeah, it's one that you can grow chicks in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Like that.
Dr. Maxwell actually made this one, which is it's a big box in our basement. We grow fecal bacteria in our basement.
Probably one of the very few families who can make that claim.
Yep, only one on the street.
So Sweden, but just before that, you had been on the Canadian Walk of Fame.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I got an award from the Canadian Walk of Fame, which was a huge award, huge award. It was a gala we went to afterwards. It's just a huge accomplishment.
You seem very poised. I mean, I was watching the video of that, and you seem not to have very much in the way of butterflies in your stomach. You're a very capable public speaker. Did that come naturally?
It definitely came with a little bit of practice. I was always told if everybody makes mistakes, so if you make a mistake, just keep going. Everyone's human.
Well, that's great, but some people are paralyzed and stay paralyzed, and you looked as though you'd been doing it, for years and years and years.
I think there was about 1,000 people in the room, including our past prime minister and Olympians and some pretty important people there. So
Did you have butterflies in your stomach?
A little bit, yeah. A little bit. Well, not too many.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the people that you've met through this, I mean, you have met the present Prime Minister, right? And the Federal Minister of Environment, the Governor General, 2 astronauts, actually. Right?
Actually, I think it's been 3 astronauts, yeah.
And, so people are obviously very ready to hear this and very ready to see a ray of hope coming from somebody like yourself.
Yeah.
You also got to Ecuador.
I did.
Tell me about that.
That was the best experience of my life. I have pictures plastered all over my bedroom wall. I talk about it every day. That's where I met my best friend. I got to go to Ecuador as a Canadian Youth Ambassador. So there was 30 youth from across Canada, and we got together, went to Ecuador to help a local community build a school. It was so much fun to be able to help a community. I learned so much about their culture and all of that. And then afterwards, we went back home. We met back up in Ottawa a month after, and we talked to MPs and senators about our issues, because I had the straight pipes. I was talking about, there were other people talking about nursing homes and how we can help benefit them, and all these different projects to see what other youth around, across the province and country are doing.
Okay. So that's a fascinating one. And,
Yeah, we were down in along the Napo River, and we were in the big boat, all 30 of us and our chaperones, and we were told not to touch the water because the only thing living in it were piranhas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there were tarantulas, and there was a big water snake, and I don't like any of those things. So, yep.
But that tells you that there's a problem in that river too, right? Is it the same thing? Is that also a polluted river?
I'm not sure. I didn't test there.
No.
No.
I wonder though if that's all that's living there.
I wonder as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got, tell me about the scholarship to Western, because I'm told you have one of those already lined up, right?
Yeah, so with the winning of Canada-wide Science Fair with my second place, I won a $2,000 bursary to Western.
Well, that's where that came from.
Yeah.
I was curious about that. Where do you see yourself going from here?
I'd like to think that I'll end up in environmental law. It could change 100 times before then, and I like that kind of field.
And not in science. You're already a scientist, but that doesn't appeal to you so much?
No, not yet, if it ever will. Science is a lot of fun, and I love what I'm doing, but after my Foraminifera project and all of this, I think that I'm really passionate about science and the environment, but I think I'll go with the environment.
Well, it occurred to me as I was reading through some of this material, I thought, you know, your impulse here really starts from trying to make a difference socially, right? It isn't really a scientific impulse in the first place. Science is a tool, but what you're really after is social change.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. How does this affect Stella Bowles, age 14, going to school with a whole bunch of other 14-year-olds, and how do they regard you? Because you've now become a kind of a superstar. Hmm?
So I do miss a lot of school, but my teachers are really good with helping me adapt and catch up. I've been exempt from a few things because I was gone, for example, in Ecuador for a week or science fair, but they realized that I'm gone to learn, not go on a beach somewhere and have fun. So they really understand that. My friends at school are really, really supportive. For my book launch, I actually had almost half my class show up, which was really nice. I wasn't expecting any of them to show up. So,
tell me about the book.
My book, so I did not write the book. Anne Laurel Carter wrote my book from my perspective. It's actually going in all grade 7 classrooms here in Nova Scotia, which is really cool to think that these kids are going to have my face in my book in their classroom and learn that, hopefully be inspired that they can make a difference too. I think it's really an inspiring book, and I hope that other kids take on projects.
How did it come about?
Anne actually summers down the road as well. They all do. There's the coolest people down the road we never knew about. Yeah, so she lives down the road, and she kind of got in contact with my mom and said, hey, I'm an author. This might be a book, might not, but do you want to have tea and see where this goes? So she came over for tea. We just talked, random little conversations, and she took notes. And she really became me to write this book. So when we were going through the editing of the book, I'd read it and be like, and I'd look at it and think, wow, that's something I would totally say. And just, she put little quirks that I'd say. She even got my dad's jokes in the book. Yeah, it's really well written.
So she really had listened to your voice.
Yes, definitely. She did an amazing job.
Did you spend a lot of time interviewing for that?
Yeah, but she lives in Toronto, so we'd have to FaceTime. She was actually on vacation at one point, so we were FaceTiming with her on vacation. It was a really cool experience on how someone writes a book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amazing that it's going into all the grade 7 classrooms.
Yeah, that was a really cool email to receive.
Yeah.
Mom texted me while I was at school and said, read this email, and I read it, and I had to read it again because it's going in all grade 7 classrooms. It's incredible.
Yeah. And you'd met Margaret Miller, the provincial minister of environment.
Yes.
And I sometimes wonder what the world looks like to her. I'm just curious if she said anything to you that would shed any light on this. But she spends an awful lot of time saying no, that we can't do anything about this, or that we don't have the information, or so on and so forth. But she seemed very forthcoming with you. Did you get any sense of her having difficulty doing that, or
She had always been very nice to me, and I appreciate that. She'd always listen to me, which is nice. I have tried to enforce illegal straight pipes all across Nova Scotia, and say that when an illegal straight pipe is sold, that when a house is sold with an illegal straight pipe, it should be switched over, which makes sense. Every house that's sold with one of these illegal pipes, it's switched over to a septic tank. Then that's one less in our rivers. But that idea was kind of swept under the rug. I emailed her twice, kind of about this subject. I actually got to meet with her people, which was a good meeting. Had a good talk. So hopefully we can see some change.
Do you sense that is likely to happen, that there will be a prohibition against transferring the property without rectifying the sewage situation?
I hope that there's something that comes about that when a house is sold, the straight pipes should be switched over. They're illegal. They're not even supposed to be happening. People shouldn't have them, but they're still there. So we definitely need enforcement on these.
This is where environmental law comes in, you know,
Exactly.
because I mean the law is there,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's not enforced, it means nothing.
I've definitely been talking with some environmental lawyers to see their points on this, and
Have you?
it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see how it all works.
I was curious to know if you had talked to environmental lawyers, if they had sought you out and sort of said, you know, can we do something together on some of these issues?
Yeah, I've definitely been talking to a few of them. Yeah.
Well, that's really promising, because, you know, like I'm with you, it seems to me that when the house is sold, you don't have to say everybody has to do it all at once, but when the house is sold, there should be some way to, and maybe you just add it to the mortgage. You know, you add the cost to the cost of the house and finance that over the lifetime. How difficult would that be?
It makes
really?
sense. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Can you judge anything about your impact on the kids around you? You know, have any of them begun to move in these kinds of directions, for example, or are they untouched by it?
I think that kids are definitely, hopefully, touched by what I'm doing. After presentations, I always have the occasional few kids that come and ask me if they can do testing for their water, or if they can help, or what can they do to create change for their community. When I was in Sweden, a couple kids asked me for my autograph, which I thought was funny.
I'm not surprised, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the cover. So have you been helping some of the other kids to do some testing, and how has that been working out?
Yeah, so I've been going around the province. I have 4 groups, I believe now, that I'm showing them how to do the testing. I provide them with a kit for a year's worth of testing. If the results are bad, hopefully they aren't, but we know that some will be. We can get political like I did, whether using my Facebook page or they create their own and I just share it. Then we're hopefully going to get political and clean up more waterways like I did. So really inspiring kids to take on a cause like I did.
Are any of them doing things in other fields? I mean, like air pollution or any other the many, or, you know, biodiversity or wetlands or all kinds. There's all kinds of stuff all around us. Are any of them doing any of those kinds of things?
I'm not aware of anybody doing anything else, but I'm hopeful that there are kids doing things that I just haven't heard about, and hopefully I'll hear in the news in the next little bit.
What's next for you?
What's next for me?
To some extent, you must have been just sort of surfing a wave here, and
I have been just kind of going with the flow as it comes to me. I've really been trying to focus on when a house is sold, the illegal straight pipe should be switched over to a septic tank. I think it seems like such a simple ask, but it really isn't. If I talk to some people about it, and they said it's harder than you think, but I'm really trying to push that and push the government to enforcing these illegal straight pipes. So hopefully we can see change with that within the next few years.
well, it does seem like a really logical thing to do, and it seems like a logical outgrowth of what you're doing.
It does, yeah. Every time a house is sold with one of these pipes, it's one less going into our beautiful rivers.
And what are they saying about what makes that so difficult?
There are some real estate agents that aren't very happy about it. People say that the house would lose value, or there's a few little things that people aren't too impressed with. But
Yeah, but you know, it is illegal. I mean, the value of the house, you wouldn't think, should override the illegality of the sewage system.
and if the water's clean, wouldn't the value of the house go up with the property and the clean water? It would-
All the properties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It sounds to me like this is the kind of place where funds like that $1 million donation could be really, really helpful if there were, and there's no real reason that a municipality couldn't do that either. Say, in fact, I think they do it in some places where they will basically lend you the money to do the work, and then you pay it back with your taxes over a 20-year period or something like that. But they need to have the money to lend in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. So it seems like a simple ask, but there's all these different steps you have to take. So hopefully every time we go a step further in the right direction.
Well, there's lots of records in the past of issues like, say, the ozone layer and so on and so forth. People said, oh, it's absolutely impossible and the cost is out of sight. And once it's done, it's only impossible till it's done. And then people look back on it and say, oh, it wasn't so, this should be one of those.
Impossible.
Yeah, this should be one of these.
Yep.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can, instead of just taking little steps, take a big jump and really create change.
Yeah. I want to come back to the whole question of the inspiration that you've provided to a lot of people. And I noticed the Reader's Digest, for example, has you on the cover.
Yeah.
Have you had a lot of feedback from that?
I have. I was not expecting to be on the cover. I was told I'd be in the Reader's Digest, which I was pretty happy about to begin with. And then when our photographer sent me a picture of me on the cover, it was crazy cool. I called my aunt right away and told her, guess what? I'm on the cover. And she was really happy, and we were all happy. We were in the car. It was a huge success. I've had it, my teachers have it in the classrooms on the board. It's so crazy to think that I'm on the cover of a magazine.
Yes. Well, it is and it isn't. It's such a good story that any magazine would be happy to do it. I'm curious to know if that's the kind of thing, because that's the sort of place where you may not even know about it for a long time, or possibly not ever, but somebody's reading that someplace and saying, well, wait a minute, if she can do it, we can do it. And I'm curious to know if you're getting any of that back from the magazine articles, particularly, just as people sort of saying, I saw this and I want you to know what's happened here.
I've had a few people message me on my Facebook page and just say, I love what you're doing, I saw your article, or I saw you on TV the other night. And every time someone messages me or sees this article, it gets the message further, which is really good. Every time somebody else knows, that's another person to educate it, and then if they tell their friends about it, that's more people, and it hopefully snowballs into more people wanting change to happen. And
so Stella, when you look forward to the lifetime that you have ahead of you, as I'm now looking back on the one that I've had, but as you look forward, do you feel hope? Do you think do you see the prospects of major change that will make the planet a much more livable place and prevent the disasters we seem to be hearing predicted all the time?
I do have hope. I'm very hopeful that other people will take on this cause. My generation has a lot of power, especially with social media now. With just one simple post can create so much talk and hopefully fix our world.
As I stand here, the most striking current news in the fight against climate change is an international movement of kids going on strike from their schools to protest adult inaction. In the US, kids have sparked a national conversation about gun control. And of course, the most important climate suit in the United States right now is the Juliana case. 21 kids suing the American government for its encouragement of fossil fuel use and its knowing failure to address climate change. Tomorrow belongs to the children of today, and they, thank God, are already starting to shape it. If you enjoyed this interview, you might also enjoy our interviews with Rachel Parent, the teenage anti-GMO activist, and with Alexandra Morton, the amazing citizen scientist fighting for the survival of the wild Pacific salmon. For The Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time. Mark Boyle set out to live for a year in what most of us would consider extreme poverty. Feeling that money distorted our relationship with the natural world and with one another, he set out to live for a full year without making any use of money at all. Mark Boyle is a young Irishman from County Donegal, and he's not a dewy-eyed, unsophisticated idealist. He has a degree in business and economics, from the National University of Ireland. He's also had the experience of managing a business. At the end of that experimental year, to his surprise, he found he was happier, healthier, and more content than he had ever been. So he continued to live that way. He wrote a book called The Moneyless Man and used the royalties to start a movement called Freeconomy. The heart of the Freeconomy movement is an online site which presents the philosophy of moneyless living and provides a clearinghouse where members can join and connect with other members to share skills, possessions, and accommodation. It's now used by people in 162 countries. When you completely localize your economy, Mark says, when you meet your needs within the 15 to 20 mile radius in which you live, you stop your reliance on money, on fossil fuels, and on all the other environmental destruction that our pact with money buys. It's not just about money, it's a design for life. Mark Boyle's second book, The Moneyless Manifesto, was just approaching publication when we spoke to him. We found him living in a borrowed house in the Ashdown Forest in Sussex, England, where his partner was studying at the local college.
Just happened to move over to the UK and got a job in an organic food store, and that put me into contact with lots of kind of green thinking people, you know, people who are questioning things. You know, I'd heard of earthworms and the bees and stuff for the first time after having studied economics for 6 years. I'd never actually once come across kind of real life economics. And so it made me question everything about the way we were living and the monetary system. And I got to the point in 2006 where I was trying to think, what am I going to dedicate my life to? Like, there's so many big issues in the world, you know, from sweatshops to factory farms and ecological destruction, like, which is going to be my passion? And I realized that these were all just symptoms of a deeper root cause. And for me, that root cause was our separation from the things we consume, our separation from nature. Until we reconnect with what we consume and with the natural world, then very little is going to change. And I had another kind of moment's realization that one of the biggest disconnecting tools that we have is money. You know, it gives us the illusion of independence. You know, we all kind of want to be independent. You know, it's something we're taught from an early age. It's a good thing to be independent, but what we're actually really doing is just becoming dependent on people far away from us. It's not like any of us could survive by ourselves today. We all, you know, buy our stuff from across the world, and instead we're dependent on those people as opposed to people in our local communities, and that's also led to the destruction of community. So so I just explored that for a while, and I realized after speaking out about the consequences of money. We speak always about the benefits of money. It's every day in the papers. But what we don't talk about is the consequences. And I realized that actually there's no point me talking about these consequences if I don't actually start to live it myself first, to see how it feels as a human being to live without money in a world that's pretty much driven by it. So I made a commitment for 1 year to live without money, see how it feels as a human being, and that ended up being an almost 3-year experience. So so as you can imagine, it went quite well for me. I enjoyed the experience.
Well, in the book, you get to the end of the book and this question comes up, are you going to continue? And you wrestle with this pretty hard for a bit, and you finally conclude that you really are genuinely better off. You're fitter, you feel better, you feel you're more in harmony with what you really believe, right?
For sure, yeah. By the end of it, my biggest problem was, can I go back into the monetary world? And it was a real struggle for a few months, and I just realized I've never been happier. Like, it's like, and this is part of our conditioning, you know, because it was that's why the struggle was so hard. I was still conditioned into thinking, you know, of course I've got to go back into using money. And I thought, well, do I? And so I continued doing it after the first year. And it has been the best experience of my life on so many different levels.
Let me go back and make sure that I'm clear about the role of cash that you saw, which is basically, it's a device that has its conveniences, but really distances us from the reality of our own lives. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I would call it like a disconnector. Disconnecting us from each other first, because when you have this liquid tool, you don't really need people in your local community. You know, you can buy in whatever you need. You know, you can pay a kind of remote landlord for your rent. You can pay somebody in the local supermarket who doesn't even know your name, you know, for your food. They don't know whether you're a nice person or whether you contribute, you know, to your local community or whatever you do. You've got cash, and you get food. So you don't need anybody in your community. You don't have to live in a certain way. You don't have to respect people, and there's huge consequences of that for community. But there's also ecological consequences, because when we disconnect from what we consume, we don't really engage on a heart level the processes that are involved in creating what we consumed. So I went to a refugee centre in Calais on the north of France, where refugees were staying waiting to get into the UK. And they all come from Afghanistan and Iraq, and they told me some of the most horrific stories about you know, the wars in their country and why they had to leave. And I realised that actually a lot of these people are leaving because we want the resources. You know, it's, you know, some of these wars are not. It's obviously more complex than this, but there's an element of resource about it. And I realised that actually, you know, if it wasn't until that moment where I actually looked in the guy's eyes and he told me that he'd lost 3 members of his family from the war, that it actually hit me in here, and I went, I can't use fossil fuels anymore. I can't be part of this system that is wiping out people's families, you know, destroying ecologies all over the world. And I think that's what money does. It disconnects us from seeing those people's eyes. We don't see the processes involved. And until we can intellectualize things, it's not like there isn't information out there about the things we're doing today, yet so few of us change the actual way we live. And I really genuinely believe it's because we don't connect with the processes enough, and money is that disconnector.
I remember during the Iraq War, somebody in the States said that the attitude of Americans was, how did those people get to be living on top of our oil? And which is almost exactly that same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a story, you know, and we've in the West particularly we've become to see nature as something that we've lordship over, and that we've got the right to everything. And it's a very crazy mindset, and it's going to have pretty severe consequences for it unless we change that story, pretty soon.
So when you get back into a closer relationship with the elements of your own life, what's that like? I mean, the moment I say to people, I'm going to go and meet this guy who's a moneyless man, he's lived without money for a year, I didn't know it was 3 years, but you know, for a year, and you can see their minds start to go, how would you do that? You know, where would you live? How would you eat? Tell me a bit about the nuts and bolts of what it was like to do that.
Yeah, so when I started, just before I'd started, 2 or 3 months before, I had actually made a list of everything I had currently consumed in my life. And it was a bigger list than I was hoping it would be. I was quite surprised by how consumerist I still was, and even considering myself to be quite, you know, environmental or green or whatever. And so I just went through a process of actually going, okay, this is how I currently meet my needs, and actually I've got to find a new way of doing that because I'm no longer going to be using money. And so some things obviously got knocked off the list straight away, like iPods weren't on the list anymore because it was difficult making them from nettles and rose hips and stuff. But then there was stuff that on there I thought actually I can still do that, you know, and so I would come up with a solution, either that be going and learning the skill myself, or you know, developing a relationship with somebody in my local community where, you know, where they would help me in that process, you know, initially at least. And by the end I realised actually I can do everything that I want to do in life without money and in a much more connected way. So the book that I've just finished, the Moneyless Manifesto, it's where the first book was just about the human story of living without money. This book's about how anybody can live without money, and it gives a huge list of all the different aspects of life. from how you wipe your bum to brush your teeth to how you travel and where you get free accommodation and how you can eat for free, and it breaks down every aspect of our lives and says these are all the different solutions that are out there. And it's not claiming to say that I've got all the solutions, because I think solutions need to be localized, but it's saying that this is a foundation. You can then localize that foundation for wherever in the world you are. But you'd be completely surprised by how much you can actually do without ever needing money. It's just actually thinking about the world in a different way.
And of course, be different in terms of what you would feel you needed. I mean, a person who wanted to be a farmer and a person who wanted to be a writer would have very different kind of requirements.
Of course, so it will be different for everybody, and some people have got kids, and other people live, 1,000 miles away from their family and stuff. So, I'm really explicit about not saying there's one solution fits all type thing. I think one of my main point is actually just see things in a different way, and whatever your situation is, you'll find that you can demonetize your life to some extent. And it sounds quite like a sacrificial thing, but actually what you find is a much deeper relationship. So deeper relationship with your land, deeper relationship with the people in your community, with friends and so on. And that's the big gain from it. We always think in terms of losing something if you give up money, but what I've found is actually you gain something much greater.
You lived in a caravan that you acquired essentially for free, right? How did that happen?
So I got the caravan off a project called FreeCycle, which many people will be aware of. It basically takes things that people don't want, and they post them, and people who do want them can accept them, and vice versa. So sometimes I'll give away things on FreeCycle, and if I need something, I'll post something there. And I decided to live without money one day, and thought, okay, where am I going to live? And I just went on and posted, wanted some kind of living situation, like a yurt, caravan, tent, anything. And a woman just emailed me back and said, I've got a caravan that is costing me 25 crore a month to store in a yard, and I'm never going to use it again, so do you want it? And I was like, seriously? Like, okay. And for me, there's a little beautiful story in there, because a year earlier I had sold my houseboat in Bristol Harbour to set up the Free Economy project, and I'd done it. I just felt impassioned. This is what I need to do, and it was kind of like just the universe, just kind of everything kind of flows back and forward, and so it was kind of like giving up my house a year earlier, and then just in the spirit of the gift, a house coming back into my world. A much cheaper house, unfortunately, but still exactly what I needed. So that's where the house came about.
Now you need a place to put it. What's that?
So I stayed. I met a woman just on a cycle path one day, cycling past. She said, she called me over and said, there's this project we're starting up between Bristol and Bath. Would you like to get involved? Like on a voluntary role, and I was like, yeah, it sounds really good. And explored it with them, and it appeared that actually it would work for them if I went out and put my caravan out there and grew some food for them. And so I went there, grew my own food, grew some food for the people, and lived in an orchard for 3 years, which, as you can imagine, was rather pleasant.
Lovely. Yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah, people always think it was kind of living in hell for 3 years, in some kind of terrible condition. It was actually easily the nicest place I've lived. Waking up in the morning, seeing deer, and foxes and rabbits, and sitting under a tree reading a book. In the evening, watching the sun go down. Life could have been a lot worse.
I think you said at one point that you didn't have your iPod, but you had the songs of the birds every time you turned around.
Exactly, and the thing with the iPod is we consume music. We don't participate in our entertainment anymore. We've become consumers of everything, and I think for me, what I want to do from here on in my life is actually start participating as much as I can. So like I want to learn the bodhrán, for example, and I want to actually start making my own music. I'm not very musically talented, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway.
But you're from Donegal, and there's plenty of people there who make their own music, and any good pub will have its own music, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not going to struggle for people to give me advice and some lessons.
Yeah. Oh, this all sounds great in the summertime. What about the wintertime? And what about getting around in the wintertime?
Yeah, the winter actually, just quite unfortunately for myself, I went through the 3 coldest winters in the UK, probably this century. All happened the 3 years that I was living without money. So every year there had been at least 2 or 3 snows, which, and ironically it hasn't happened in the last winter, when I'd actually kind of been in a house. But the winter was definitely, it's a whole different feel, but it's something really important about that too. It's about staying in tune with the seasons. And I've found in the past when I've been living in a house and not experiencing the seasons, I feel very disconnected from that. I don't really know what's going on the land. And so yeah, so there was difficulties. I'd wake up some mornings and the duvet would be a little just bordering on crusty in terms of being cold on the top, and that is enough to put some people off it. And there are definitely different things that most people would call hardships. Things that because we're quite comfortable in our world today, people would think of as definitely being something like a step down in lifestyle. But the thing I really want to ask is the level of comfort we have today, and is that sustainable? And is our disconnection from the seasons actually sustainable? It sounds like quite an abstract question, but it actually is our disconnection from the seasons sustainable? Because if we're not engaged with the seasons and the cycles of life, then are we ever going to become ecologically aware enough to live a different story?
Right. Yeah, and you do have that experience right close up. You heated with wood mostly, is that right?
Yeah, wood. Yeah, so I'd chop the wood. I did the whole process, and with wood you kind of store it up for as long as you can beforehand. And yeah, so I had a little gas burner, gas bottle burner, that was converted from an old 13 kilogram gas bottle. Best wood burner I've ever had, by the way. Worked very efficiently, and it was like a sauna some evenings. People were thinking, "You're not cold," and it was a bit cold the next morning because it wasn't the best insulated place you can imagine. But in the evenings and nighttime, it was just like you're peeling off the clothes, just trying to stay cool. And the wood was from meters. It wasn't even fuel miles. It was fuel meters. So yeah, it's just something about looking at fire too. You're sitting back in bed reading a book, and you're looking at the flames glowing. There's something in the wood crackling. There's something quite special about that.
Yeah, there is, but you had some difficulty with bicycles, as I recall, because a bicycle was your way of getting around. And that's not something you can entirely make yourself. You needed some other materials that were hard to get at. Tell me about that.
Yeah, the bicycle, and it is one of the there's lots of. I'm very explicit about saying, there was elements of the industrial world that I was using in my time without money, and the bicycle was definitely. You can't make a bicycle. Actually, there's a guy, and there's people now building completely wooden bicycles. They're kind of pioneering them at the moment in the UK. I think it's called a splinter bike. But I was using a bike that I couldn't make myself, for example. And at the start, I had difficulties with punctures and stuff. You can't easily, fix punctures by consumable parts and stuff, and I ended up, in terms of tires, I got a pair of green tires which are puncture proof. The rest, to be honest, I would find different pieces of people always throw out different parts of bicycles because they've got new parts and so on, and I always find the parts that I needed in the gift economy. But there is a hypocrisy in that. There is a perceived hypocrisy. But I've kind of described it in terms of it is a pigeon who sleeps in a church steeple because the tree that was that would have been there before we built something doesn't exist anymore. Is the pigeon a freeloader? You know, if it eats food off the ground and sleeps in the, the pigeon's just being in the world. You know, it's accepting things as they are. It's not saying, it's not trying to change the world or trying to come up with solutions to economic problems. It's just being, it's living in the present. It's dealing with what is at hand. And I think there's definitely an element of that to it. I think David Holmgren calls it a creative descent. I think we've got to use what we have now to get to transition to a new place. Like we're in a bit of a mess. In a lot of ways. There's no easy answers to some of the stuff. And I think we need to be creative about how we transition away from that. And it's impossible to go from fully industrialized to no industrialized products in a matter of days type thing. And you've got to take steps, and you've got to reorganize your life. It's my family's back in Ireland, and unless I never want to see them again, I'm going to have to find a way to. If I don't want to see them again, that's fine. But if I do, then I'm going to have to go crossing ferries and stuff, and so unless I make a decision to go back and live in Ireland, then that poses problems for me ongoing. And so there's big questions. There's no easy answers. We're in a muddle.
Well, that's right, but it's a question of degree to some extent, but that is one of the criticisms you had, isn't it? That people have sort of said, well, it's only possible for you to live in this dreamy, moneyless world because you're completely surrounded by all kinds of things that money has bought for other people, right?
Yeah, that is. There's many criticisms actually, and that's one of them. But yeah, like I accept the criticism, like I do all criticisms, and there's always usefulness in those criticisms. Like I think my problem is that we've created a world. It's not like there's many cultures still in the periphery of our civilizations that are still living moneyless. That can't even conceive of the idea of money. They can't even conceive of numbers. The numerical systems we have or the language that we use, let alone actual. Let alone money. So it's not like you need money to be in this world. The problem is that we've created a world conveniently for a lot of people that involves us having to use it, and the more you look into kind of anthropological studies and the whole history of how money was created, and in different parts of the world, the more interesting and darker that becomes. And yes, of course, given the way we live today, where you've almost got to pay to be on the earth, which is a bizarre thing when you consider no other species. Like you need planning permission to be in the countryside, to build yourself a simple dwelling. Like we don't ask that of a bird or an otter or a badger. Why do we ask it of ourselves? Why can we not be part of that landscape? Then yeah, when you're within the story we live in today, then of course it's there's an inherent hypocrisy that can be perceived. But I think that's only because we live in a bizarre story. I think the idea of actually living without money is much older than us. 95% of our time on Earth here has been moneyless. It's in the last 5% that we've really thought that money was the be all and end all.
Well, in a sense, that's right. You're going back to an earlier time when we got along without that means of exchange at all, found ways to get what we needed and to live together too. Yeah.
It was a time when we were actually living sustainably. Like people will say, "Oh, we didn't have all these different things we have now," but you have the question: are all these things we have now actually a long-term possibility? I would personally argue not. I know the processes involved in making them. I know what it does to our habitat, and I don't see any way we can continue like we are today.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your own personal experience here. It seems to me that what you had to do, what someone would have to do to follow in your footsteps, is they would have to shed a whole bunch of rather formless anxieties. Right? That if I do this, then something terrible I'm going to run out of something or other, or I'm going to be sick and can't get help, or and these are not things that are necessarily real problems for most people most of the time. Is that fair? But how anxious did you feel about this at the beginning?
Yeah, that's a completely fair statement. I was anxious. I was anxious for the first 3 months, to be honest. It took me until about the 4th month to fully trust in just the kind of what I would call the organic flow of life. You know, to just actually, it comes with experience. Like you can't let go of those anxieties until you've fully experienced that everything's going to be okay. So up to that point in my life, I'd always had a bit of money to fall back on. So if something comes up, you've got something in the bank. You know, you can use that to get yourself out of a situation. When you let go of that security blanket in a way, then you have, you know, for a few months you're constantly on edge, thinking, am I going to live, you know, to the end of the week? You know, like what if something goes wrong? You know, and all I can really say is that requires just taking a kind of a leap of faith with it. And so yeah, I actually spoke to, in the new book, I spoke to Dr. Chris Johnson, who's he's an addiction specialist in the UK. He's worked in addictions for 20 years, and he's just written a book with Joanna Macy, who you may know of, called Active Hope. And when we spoke about it, I'd done an interview, and he spoke about our addictions, basically to civilization, industrialization, and to the way we live today. And addiction is a very powerful thing. You know, we think of it in terms of alcohol or drug abuse and so on, but we've become addicted to a certain way of life. And like any addict, we don't want to take that away because it's painful. And even like with an alcoholic knows, you know, drink's killing them, it's ruining their relationships. Yet to still continue with it because it's an addiction. And it's the same with us. I think it's going to ruin our lives. You know, it's destroying our relationships. Yet we continue with this story. And so yeah, I think addiction is a strong thing, but I think it's something we're going to have to work on. And thankfully, there's people like Chris out there doing that work.
Well, it's very interesting. That's a very interesting thought. That in a sense, that we are addicted to a lifestyle, an economic model, really a story, as you're saying, and then it seems to follow that part of the reason that you would feel so good at the end of it is the recognition that you had escaped an addiction, and also that there was a certain kind of benign quality in the overall flow of life, that things are not going to generally go very catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's there was a huge sense of freedom of knowing that actually once you work through the initial anxiety and the initial fears and that lack of security, you have this sense of complete trust in the world. Like a child, you know, like just think of a child feels just knowing that tomorrow is going to provide for them. You know, children aren't worrying about the next day. You know, and if you look at studies of different tribal people across the world, I remember one people I looked at, and when asked if to store food, you know, or how to store or preserve food, they said, I store food in the belly of my brother, and that they never stored food. If they had a big hunt, then they would share it around everybody, you know, and sometimes they were the last person to eat themselves. They got the last cut because it was more important that they give, and that's a certain story. And so yeah, so once you get over these addictions, there's a sense of freedom that comes from that. You know you're going to be okay. You know, no matter, like, if economic collapse happened tomorrow or an ecological collapse of some sort, things went a bit wrong, then you've got that resource to draw on. You know that actually there's new ways of doing things that you can tap into, and that feels like my security now. Like, I've got relationships with land. I know how to grow food. I know how to forage a little bit. I've got a lot of good friends. That's my security these days.
Yeah, and the reward must be that you don't have the anxiety. That the anxiety, I think the anxiety is constantly there at a low level with almost everybody in the current social order. For
sure, yeah, it has to be there, because I think on some level we're all aware that, especially more and more, even I go back home to Ireland now sometimes, and Ireland's kind of undergone a bit of an economic collapse from where it was, and there's just a lot more awareness now that actually things aren't as secure as they seemed 10, 15 years ago, and people are really looking for, like, I'd done a talk there to about 350, 400 people that if I'd done it 5 years ago would have probably had 10, 15 kind of, you know, greenies and lefties coming along, you know, and it's become much more mainstream now that people are questioning the economic systems we're living in. But within that system, there has to be an anxiety because you know you've no control over your situation. Like you're dependent on external forces, often very far away. You know, not just your governments, but the people who supply your food and the oil companies who get your food to your doorstep. And if that system collapses, then what are you left with? How do you meet your needs? Which is what economics is about. Economics is always conflated with finance. So we talk about things being economically viable when we're really saying they're financially viable. Economics is about meeting your needs. It's not about money, and we don't know how to meet our needs these days without this thing. And money is just a story. So if you stop believing in that story, or people lose faith in that story, what are you left with?
Well, one of the things I think is fascinating about this whole experiment is how angry you make people sometimes. I mean, if people get really furious that you're doing this, and you have to stop for a moment and say, why does it make any difference to you what Mark does? But they do get furious about it, right?
Yeah, I've had a lot of, it's been quite a polarizing experience actually in the feedback, you know, and a lot of people have got, you know, expressed a lot of anger at me, which, you know, I accept. You know, it's coming out for whatever reason, and I'm glad it is, you know, and I don't shirk that side of things. But I think it's because I personally understand this because this is how I was brought up. You know, I am in the society I was brought up in. You're told from the moment you're born, with the best of intentions from your teachers and your parents and stuff, that we need to be successful and we need to make money to be successful and all the trappings that come with that success. So when somebody comes out and says, you know, actually, is there consequences of this thing? You know, is there consequences of living like this? Then you're questioning somebody's identity almost. You know, the very things that make up their way of being. And none of us want our identities questioned to that depth. You know, it strikes right at the core of who we are. And so definitely there's going to be a reaction to that, you know, and it's not that I aim to create that reaction, but I think you have to speak your truth and see and speak how you see things, and that will inevitably bring up things because we identify very much with that story, with the story of money, with the story of stuff.
Yeah, and it's just the fact of your doing it. You don't have to have any. You don't even have to know these people in order to make them angry. If you do that, if you act as you have. Right?
I remember a chap called Charles Eisenstein, who you might know from. He's based in the States. He came over here. He wrote a book called Psychoeconomics, and very interesting chap. But he described first. He wrote a foreword for the book, and he was just saying that before he met me, he was a bit apprehensive even because he felt that my very existence was a threat. He speaks about gift economics and so on, and he was saying that he actually felt it a bit himself, that just my way of life was actually almost a threat to his way of life, and he's a very open, very clued-on guy, and he's been very honest about his initial kind of thoughts about the whole thing. And that's very interesting for me. You know, it's like how just a way of life can actually threaten people and provoke reaction. Because I wasn't coming out and saying like this way of living is wrong and, you know, and I'm right. It's just, this is how I want to live. And so for me, it was fascinating to see the reaction, you know, from all different angles.
Well, it is based on, your decision is based on an extreme dissent from sort of the mainline story, to call it that way. But you've also said that as long as we have money, we will never have true nonviolence or real community. Tell me a little bit about that. And the community, I think we've already touched on, that obviously if you don't have money, then you're relying on what's right now around you. You can't do things at remote distances. But what about violence? What's the relationship between money and violence?
Well, it depends on how you define violence, which is quite a big question in itself. If, you know, at the core, you could almost, the act of living is almost an act of violence. You know, if you think of, you know, what you do to, I don't personally subscribe to that, but for me, because money disconnects us from the processes of what we consume, and we don't we can intellectualize these things. We can read certain books that describe how things are produced and stuff, but we don't see the violence that happens in between. And so I do genuinely believe that until we actually take responsibility, until we see those processes, until we localize enough to see those processes, that the violence will continue, because we're enacting. I don't mean necessarily violence to other human beings, although I think that is part of what happens. If you look at sweatshops and so on, and certain industrialized processes that kill people and harm people on much different levels than the physical level, and that is a violence as well. There's spiritual violence, there's emotional violence, but I think we also inflict the violence on the natural world. We're looking at 73,000 species a year that we know of going extinct. That obviously isn't sustainable by anybody's definition of sustainability, and that has to be seen as a violence, and we have to see our culture as inflicting that violence, because the industrialized processes we're using is that's causing it. And so I think until we reconnect with what we consume, then there is going to be that inherent violence.
I love the fact that you extend that to the natural world, but even if you hold it just to the human world, what you saw in the eyes of the people in the camp in Cali reflects that violence, right?
Yeah, that was like the moment that really hit me, and I still think of the guy who I spoke to, and the various people I spoke to, but one guy in particular, and it brings up an emotional reaction in me just even thinking about him, and it became very real for me, the violence of how we live today, the violence of what we consume, on a very human level. We need to connect with that. We need to connect with the pain of that, and to provoke. I think to provoke a response that's appropriate for the crisis we're facing. I think we need to connect on a deeper level with things.
Now, some people would say that it's okay for Mark Boyle, this one guy who wants to go off and live in this eccentric way. That's obviously he can, but not everybody can do that, or maybe they can. But how widely can this be extended to other people? How many people, I guess, in a certain social group would be able to do this kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, there's lots of big questions in there, and I think in terms of the way I done it, people are right. Part of what I was doing was to kind of raise awareness of the issue. It wasn't just about me on a personal level, and so I was trying to help society question the role of money in our lives as part of that. But I think it would involve a redesign of society. That's for sure. We couldn't, the way we live, the way the UK in particular is designed, it would be almost impossible. I couldn't say completely impossible, because I don't pretend to have ultimate knowledge of everything, but I couldn't see how it would work economically in that way by any stretch of the imagination. But what I think we can do is transition to being less monetized. So money is, for GDP to grow, it needs to find ways of converting what we once done for free for each other as part of our lives, and convert that into a financial transaction. You can see that in every aspect of our lives. We used to sit around, the fire and jam and play a bit of music and stuff, and participate in these things. And now you'll have 3 people in a room on their laptops or on their iPods listening to music, consuming it, because that's you can charge people for consuming music, but you can't charge them for participating and creating it themselves. So what we've engaged in, and it's the same with childcare and looking after elderly and all these different things, we've converted what was once gift relationships into financial relationships, because that's the only way you can extract things from people. And so in terms of what I'm trying to do now is trying to help people reclaim what I would call the gift economy into their life. The bits where money has absolutely no role to play. We can still there's still some things where we are now where it can only happen because of the liquidness of money. It allows us to get things from different parts of the world that that our current economy still requires. But there's things that we can just reclaim, really quickly, and that's what I want to encourage people to do, to diversify their economy. It's not wise to be dependent on one way of meeting your needs. Any ecological system will tell you that. It's about diversification, and I want to help people diversify how they meet their needs, and the gift economy for me is a big part of that.
Now you're involved with something called Free Economy. Tell me about that, because is that the gift economy? Is that?
Gift economy or free economy would be what I would call one department of it'd be the Department of Labour, Skills and Knowledge of the gift economy, and it's an online project, because I just feel in my ideal world it'd be an offline thing, but I think it's a transitionary thing. You basically sign up anywhere in the world. You're instantly connected into your local group. It's in 160 countries around the world now, and you, from that moment onwards, you can just see you got a puncture in your bike, or you need some help in the garden, or you want to build a wall and you can't do it yourself. You search for a skill from a list of over 2,000 skills, and it lists you the nearest person to your doorstep that has that skill, and you simply contact them, get in touch. They come around, help you do it, show you how to do it in the process, which updates your skill base, which means you can help other people. And then maybe 2 weeks later, somebody who's never helped you before asks you to do something, and you just do it for them, completely unconditionally. There's no exchange. One of my things with people often think moneylessness is about barter and about it's still about exchange, but barter is just a awkward form of money. It's got localization benefits, but it doesn't get on a deeper level. And I think for me, I set up Free Economy because I'd experienced things like Let's and time banks, and there was still a lot of administration, number one, and secondly, a lot of it felt conditional. It felt like you're only helping me because you get something directly in return for it, which is what money is. And with Free Economy, it's about unconditionality. It's about, I want to help you because you need help. And really, what other reason do we need as human beings to help somebody apart from the fact that they need help? Why do we have to always get something in return for that? And this is a very deep question. I think we need to all ask ourselves, what other reason do we need to help people? And this is what Free Economy is about, and it's about just unconditional sharing of resources and skills and knowledge and our time.
It's a very deep question, I think, that that you raised there, and it almost is the extension of the rules that obtain within a family to a whole community, and when you have a community that works that way, it feels like a big family.
Yeah, people often think, the gift economy is unrealistic and stuff, and I say the gift it's happening every moment of every day. We do it in our families. I describe this to audiences sometime and say, what if you come in the evening and your partner or your mother had prepared your dinner and cooked it for you and laid it out, and you sat down and said, that's 15 quid. You'd be horrified, because it would just be an absurd thing to do. Somebody you care, one of the most intimate things you can do for somebody is prepare food, and the pleasure of looking after somebody, of caring for somebody. And it's basically extending what we do in our close network of family and friends to a wider local community. And the ironic thing is that if we actually extended that, the people would become close friends anyway, because we developed those kind of relationships that we then couldn't even dream of charging them for. And so we can still do all the things that we currently do, but in a totally new spirit, in a spirit that actually uplifts people instead of feeling like we're in competition all of the time. We always feel a sense of, I'm trying to get something off you, or somebody's trying to shaft me in some way, or get a bit more. We're always feeling like we're threatened in that way, instead of actually just changing the spirit in which we do things. And that's key to the whole thing for me. It's a different spirit.
Buried in there somewhere, there's a sense of abundance as opposed to a sense of scarcity. And so,
yeah, the current monetary system is based on scarcity. It's you have to make something scarce, often artificially, in order to sell it. This is true for books, for example. Information that now can go online and could be read by everybody, but we have to make that artificially scarce in order to sell it. And so, yeah, it's the life that I experienced without money was just full of abundance, and the more I opened up to it, the more abundant it felt as well. You know, it's I ran a one day festival in Bristol where we fed 3,000 people completely for free, a 3-course meal. There was a free cinema all day. There was a series of 8 talks. There was a free shop that was just packed. There was free workshops, the whole thing. What I found in that was that I started off and I said, I'm just going to do this for free. I don't want anything for it. From that moment onwards, I was inundated with people who said, I want to get involved. Within a day, I had 60 volunteers contact me and say, can I help you in some way? You know, people with solar powered stages were offering what they would normally charge, 300 quid a day for free. Musicians who would normally command a really, nice pay packet for performance were emailing me going, can I come and perform for free? What I found was that once you change the spirit in which you do something, everybody wanted to get involved in that same spirit. But if I'd started off and said, okay, I'll do this, but I want 50 quid for it, or 500 quid, everybody from that point onwards would have wanted their share. And that kind of sums it up for me. It's like once you start the ball rolling in a new way of doing things, everybody wants to do it in the same spirit.
That's a remarkable achievement. I remember, because you tell that story in The Moneyless Man, and it sounds like you're almost at panic stations, quite close to the event, just a few days in advance. You're thinking to yourself, I've said I'm going to do this, and how on earth is it going to happen? And then it all kind of rolls together, and you don't have an awful lot to do with it, aside from setting out the challenge, saying we want to do this.
Yeah, just of course, yeah, and it was, I was quite concerned before, because how is this actually going to work, and it was just one of the most uplifting days of my life. Just there was one where people in the kitchen had worked for 14 hours all day, and I was coming in regularly going like, please, can you take a break, like you're going to, you just go and enjoy the event. And they were like, we're enjoying ourselves, like this is, like we're having a really, really amazing day, we're meeting lots of amazing people in the kitchen, and everybody was just getting involved. And I was thinking, like, if they'd all been on minimum wage, in some kitchen, in some fast food restaurant, and the manager came in and said, can you please take a break? They'd jump at the chance. And it's because they're feeling forced into that situation, economically forced into doing something that they don't want to do. But when people choose to do something and actively want to do it, then you can't get them to stop. And there was a lot of lessons from that day, but it was just incredibly uplifting to see people want to help form a new story, effectively, a new way of living.
That sails fairly close to that question of violence again, doesn't it? That if you force somebody to do it, that's almost like a form of violence. And if you ask them to do it, as opposed to forcing them to do it, they do it better, they do it longer, they do it, you literally couldn't hire somebody to work 12 hours without a break. You wouldn't be allowed, right? That's not allowed. But somebody can give you that, and that's fine. No?
It's, yeah, as you say, it's a very subtle form of violence, what we do today. The economic system, because we've got to get the credits to pay for our mortgage or our rent, and to bring down to the supermarket to get our food, whatever. We're forced into a way of doing things, and because there's only a certain number of ways in this economy to actually get those credits, it forces people into doing. Sometimes I hear, especially in the States, of single mothers who have to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head, and somebody working around the clock just to feed their kid. If that isn't violence, what is? It doesn't have to be that way. And who's really gaining from that? Are we the people who are gaining from that, or is it a certain bunch of people who control the system? To a certain extent, who's really gaining from that? It's not the mother. She's suffering quite badly, and that's violence.
It's called a free market, oddly enough.
Yeah, the number of times I've laughed at that name. You know, it's that the free market's taken everything that was once free and turned it into commercial exercise. And so, yeah, I've often joked about the name free market.
That's a theme that's come up a lot in these interviews. Is the encroachment of the money economy into things that were once the commons, you know, and then starting with things like the Enclosure Acts in the 19th century, but also going on now to mineral concessions to private enterprise, and you know, where we live, big pieces of the ocean now suddenly being staked off for net pen aquaculture that were always free for people to go and catch lobster and so on and so forth. It's almost as though this is like a blight that keeps spreading its way into deeper and deeper into areas of human life. I'm sure they'll find a way to privatize the family eventually.
That's
Right?
the next frontier in terms of, like I know George Monbiot will talk about the land commons, something he's very well read on. But there's also the spiritual commons. You know, there's the emotional commons. There's what's happened for GDP to rise. We need to convert the commons into financial transactions. And that happens on all levels of being, and it will. You know, it will try to find it. In some ways, it already is encroached on. Like if you look at childcare, like if you ask some societies, if some societies realised that we were actually charging people to look after our neighbours' kids, you know, people in our community's kids, it would be seen as the biggest insult to charge somebody to look after children or after their elderly, you know. So it's already actually encroaching on our family, you know, and things that were just the most intimate thing, the most personal, caring thing you could do for people. We've now found a way of making it impersonal, of making it cold, you know, of making it just another way of increasing GDP. And GDP equals happiness, of course, you know. Unless GDP is rising, we're all miserable. So, which is a strong story in itself as well.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as you build the free economy, and in a sense try to claim back areas of human life from the money economy, there's a real conflict there too, isn't it? And so how is that going to work, do you think, as the free economy movement grows? It's still within the context of this antipathetic mainstream economy. Is there going to come a point where it will bump up against certain kinds of limits, or are there likely to be points of friction that will be quite dramatic, or how do you see that happening?
Yeah, I see it definitely as a transitionary thing, you know, and in terms of actually, because the free economy, the project itself is an online project. I made it online because we're at such a point in our evolution that we're afraid to knock on our neighbour's door, almost ask for help with something, you know, because we feared kind of rejection or imposing on somebody. We seem to be much easier with it, kind of putting out an email that somebody can not reply to if they don't want to. You know, they could just ignore, and then we don't have to have that kind of, we don't have to worry about, you know, sorting that out face to face. We seem to be much more comfortable with that kind of level of interaction. So it was consciously made as a web-based thing, but I would love to see it evolve into the kind of gift circle type thing, for example, where, you know, maybe it's a street and people sit around, you know, once a week and say like one round is kind of you're saying, I need X this week and I can offer Y, you know, and then it goes around another and people see, actually I've got something that I can help you with, and you've got something you can help me with, and I would like to see it evolve to a less technological thing, which I think we could. Like the bigger question is, which I think you're touching on, is the level of technology in our lives today, and high technology is something that I personally believe can only be done with a tool like money, because you need economies of scale, you need specialised division of labour, and I can't conceive of a way of organising ourselves in that way without a really massive role for the state or for a tool such as money. But this is the thing for me, I think, and this is the bigger question, I think our high technology way of living is going to have to come to an end, you know, whether we choose that as a part of a transitionary approach to becoming less like everything's technology, so even language is technology. So it's like transitioning to an appropriate level of technology, something that actually allows us to be sustainable. We can choose that, or we can. I think it will become the point where it'll just be forced upon us. We're hitting ecological limits. We can't. There's a certain point past which we can't go past, and so I think one way or another that's going to come to an end. And I'd be lying if I said I knew how that's going to unfold. I think you're a liar if you think you know how that's going to unfold. You can guess how the whole thing's going to happen, but I think unless we transition, unless we consciously make that move, then it'll work itself out one way or another.
Well, there is a real conflict between what you've described, which is, in a way, is an old thing. You're doing it like a new thing, but it's an old thing, that business, that sort of natural exchange among people where, we minister to one another's needs without unconditionally. But we've built a culture that absolutely doesn't do that, and there is a real conflict there, and there obviously, as the moneyless economy grows, the money economy is going to become quite alarmed. I mean, you're ultimately going to have to become somewhat political, no?
Yeah, and you could say that it's already political, because almost everything we do in this world is almost a political act. And I think, the more to some extent, it's become more and more. But the more this way of doing things becomes serious, and becomes taken seriously because more people are getting involved, then you will run up against more and more political factors.
Well, you're back to the anger we talked about, right? Where your very example makes people angry because it challenges their way of doing things.
Yeah, and the thing is that one of the things we're going to face, I think, at some point is that actually that anger could come out in terms of political system. So I think once you challenge the status quo, and if one of the biggest insults, the only insult I've really found at the moment is the fact that I haven't had a death threat yet, because that means that I obviously haven't been very successful, because I think to the level of change we actually need, I had to challenge the way things are to a sufficient level where it provokes almost that level of reaction. I think the day where the gift economy is about becoming so successful and so widespread that I actually start getting death threats, it'll be a happy day for me.
Well, it almost echoes the emergence of the gay and lesbian coming out, because that was a company that was very threatening in the same kind of way, and did indeed produce not only death threats but deaths.
Exactly, and it's obviously, I'd say that slightly tongue in cheek. It's not, I'm not exactly hoping for death threats.
No, that's right.
But it's something I feel passionately about, and I think it's a level of change that we need, and so I'm happy for that to come to the head, in whatever way it needs to, and to deal with whatever comes along the way. I think it's something that I want to spend my life doing, and we need to challenge things.
You've also talked about combining deep ecology with economics to give radically new perspectives on the pillars of economic theory. That's a huge sweeping comment. What does it mean?
Can you remind me of my own words?
Combining deep ecology with economics to give radically new perspectives on pillars of economic theory.
For me, it's like one of the things I really want to do is get people thinking about economics in a different way. And I think the more you understand deep ecology and what Bill McKibben might call deep economy, is that it really is about meeting your needs, and for some of the pillars of economics, such as economies of scale and division of labour, with these theories, there's always the attitude that maximum is best. We live in a society where maximum is best. We don't think in terms of optimum, and I think we need to start thinking in terms of optimum. Optimum sometimes is maximum, I think very rarely, but I think what optimum is about is finding the point where it's in balance, where it balances up the needs of everything and comes to the optimum point. And what we go for today is optimum economies of scale, optimum division of labour. So I don't personally I'd hate to see a world where we don't cooperate anymore, where everybody's living self-sufficiently. So when you do everything yourself, it's You know, it can turn into drudgery at that point. So there is an optimum level of division of labour. You know, I can make the dinner, and you know my partner can be chopping the wood. You know, or whatever. You know, and I think the optimum level for me is the kind of the Dunbar number, the 150, 200. You know, so organising ourselves in streets or in suburbs or neighbourhoods or small villages, and in that kind of scale where we can have a relationship. That's the Dunbar number, is where everybody within that kind of size can have a real relationship with each other. And I see that as being the optimum level of economies of scale, the optimum level of division of labour. But I think you need to understand economics on a different level to kind of understand why that's an important aspect of things, I guess.
Yeah, so you'd be talking about an economics of optimizing value in this sort of small, intimate, multifaceted kind of way as being, you know, much rather than oversimplifying things and doing mass things. Is that the kind of direction we're talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. I'd fully agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a spiritual element to your decision to live without money. Tell me about that.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think we're in this kind of dualistic mindset, and so we separate spiritualism from materialism. And I actually see spiritualism and materialism as the same thing. You know, I would say that my form of spirituality is what I would call applied spirituality. You know, it's not abstracted out of the real world. It's fully integrated in. So one of the problems I found with spirituality on a personal level myself is becomes kind of, you know, something we talk about and over, you know, cappuccinos and we over spiritual practices. But then when it comes to our everyday lives, I think we live in ways often that don't reflect those beliefs very accurately. And so what applied spirituality is about really is about less of the talking and more of the doing. You know, more of actually how do I integrate this into my everyday life? You know, and so to become less things. So I think there's definitely a very strong spiritual element, but I would see it almost being just as much of a material element, because it
kind of like a merging of action and value at the same time, so that your actions reflect your values and your values express your action, or your values are expressed by your action.
Exactly. I think there's spiritual practices that are very beneficial to help you to lead a more compassionate, more respectful, gentle life. But I've often described having a shit in a compost toilet as being much more of a spiritual practice than sitting cross-legged, contemplating life, and then going off to your flush toilet and putting your waste into drinking water. So I think we need to regain the spirituality into the simplest of acts of our lives. You know, how we deal with our waste. You know, how we treat food. You know, whether we just chuck it out mindlessly or whether we eat every drop we have and produce it ourselves and compost what we don't use. And I think these are very spiritual acts. I've often sat in the compost toilet and felt a deep sense of connection with life, because you feel that circular nature with things. You feel engaged in life in a way that you don't when you're just abstractly, you know, contemplating spirituality. And I think if we're going to face the ecological crisis we're facing, I think we need to engage on a spiritual level as well, on that level.
We've talked a lot about the benefits of the, for lack of a better word, the experiment you've performed, or the experiment into which you're converting your life. What's the most surprising outcome of this for you?
Of my life without money?
Without money, yeah.
What was the most surprising thing? I think probably the most surprising thing was that I actually loved it. You know, like it wasn't. I didn't think I would love it beforehand. I just didn't know. You know, I was pretty scared. You know, I was pretty anxious, as we spoke about. I kind of felt it was something I had to do, you know, just to see. I didn't know anybody who was doing it. I didn't know whether what I was talking about was utter nonsense, you know, and if it was even possible. So I was kind of coming from that. I didn't even expect to come out of it loving it. You know, we're feeling incredibly healthy. incredibly happy. And so I think that's probably been the biggest surprise, and just and also the fact that like I'm a very average guy. I'm of average intelligence. I'm of average. I'm not saying this sort of self-deprecation. It's just fact. And the fact that I could actually, given that my upbringing wasn't anything, I didn't grow up in a hippie family. I never really got involved in growing food before. Long before I'd done this, and just my ability to actually survive, without money, kind of surprised me as well. I was like, actually, if I can do this, anybody can do it. You don't have to have special qualities to live without money. You just have to kind of commit to it in a way, and want to have a different story in your life, and that's all you really need to do. Everything after that's just technical details, like. But I think maybe just one thing I would add would be a deeper sense of connection with people and place. That was what I didn't even have a conception of beforehand. I had it in some ways on an intellectual level, but not on a kind of a heart, emotional level. That deep sense of, of connection with all, and to see yourself as part of an ecology, as a part where when I die, I'll become life or something else, and the humility that comes with knowing that, your life for bacteria, your life for. I'd love to be eaten by buzzards when I'm dead, and to actually give back to what I took from all my life, and to engage with death. And that's something that I actually have contemplated over the last few years as well. And that it's not this thing that should be feared. It's a very beautiful thing. To transform yourself back into the world again, and to be food for others just as you've eaten from them.
Mark Boyle, the moneyless man. If you enjoyed hearing about Mark's experiment with radical simplicity, you'll probably be interested in our interview with Annie Hill and Trevor Robertson, who live very happily at sea with a similarly pared down lifestyle. You may also enjoy our interview with poet and farmer Brian Brett, who operates a subsistence farm on an island off the coast of British Columbia. For The Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time. Yvon Chouinard detests business, but he's a very successful businessman all the same. He's the owner and president of the sportswear giant Patagonia, which he describes as my resource to do something good. Chouinard's father was an impoverished French-Canadian mechanic who moved his family to Los Angeles in 1946. As a teenager, Yvon became a falconer, which led him into rock climbing, which led him into equipment manufacturing, which led him into outdoor apparel. Today, Patagonia is an enormously successful global company, and Yvon Chouinard is a new kind of businessman who believes, he says, that the accepted model of capitalism that necessitates endless growth and deserves the blame for the destruction of nature must be replaced. Patagonia has a wildlife rescue facility at its headquarters, donates 10% of its pre-tax profits to environmental causes, and gives 2-month paid leaves to employees who want to work full-time for environmental organizations. And that's only the beginning. Yvon Chouinard believes that the key to success is to hire excellent people and then let them run the company. This leaves him free to pursue what he calls his MBA, Management by Absence, traveling the world, speaking to environmental causes, and challenging business to reinvent itself. I want to start with a quote by Yvon Chouinard, which was, "If you want to understand the entrepreneur, study the juvenile delinquent." What lies behind that insight?
Well, I think, like I wrote in my book, the juvenile delinquent, he basically says that this sucks, I'm going to do it my own way. And some of the most successful businessmen I know have done it their own way and kind of broken the paradigm And because, you know, when you're trying to start a business, you want to do something that no one else is doing. I mean, why try to compete against existing businesses? And it takes the juvenile delinquent to have the creativity and the will to go against everything that people say you have to do. And like in my company, we hire, I have 1,200 employees worldwide. I probably have 2 or 3 with MBAs. I was always a craftsman. My father was a craftsman. My father was born in Quebec, started working at 12 years old, walked over the border into Maine and started working in a mill at 10 years old, actually. 10 years old. But he became a tradesman and could build an entire house by himself. So I kind of inherited those genes, I think. And so I'm an innovator, not an inventor, but I look at products, whether it's a tablespoon or whatever it is, and I can say, that thing's ugly, I could make a better one of those. And so when I was young, I was a mountain climber, and I looked at all the tools for mountain climbing, and they were all really rough and didn't work very well, and they were made real cheaply. And so I thought, I can do better than this. That's how I started out in business. So that's been the story of my business, is just taking existing product, whether it's a dress or whatever, and making it better.
You were actually quite hostile to business. Were, and I suspect are quite hostile to business in a broad sense, right?
I'm a child of the 60s and stuff. I mean, in the 60s, you were against everything. You were against the military-industrial complex. You're against your parents. You're against, everything going on in society. So it's rebelling. And so a lot of those qualities I still have in me.
But you came to believe that business was really the source of the major environmental problems, right? That we needed to, well, capitalism in any case needed to be upended and replaced. Right?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, I saw that as, I've had several times in my life when I woke up and I realized I was part of the problem and that I should do something about that so that I became part of the solution rather than the problem. And the first time was when I was, blacksmithing pitons, and we started making hard steel pitons because they could be used over and over again. And in America, we were coming from, reading Thoreau and Emerson and John Muir and, the great naturists in America, and we felt like you shouldn't leave anything behind. Go into the wilderness, but leave nothing behind. Whereas the Europeans, their attitude was conquer the mountains and then make them easier for the next party. So they would make as cheap of pitons as they possibly could and then drive them into the rock and leave them there so that the next party would have an easier experience. And, it was manifest destiny, kind of. And we thought that was wrong, that you should go into the wilderness and find no trace of having been there of anybody else. So I made pitons out of hard steel that could be put in and taken out easily. But, with every technology, there's an unintended consequence. Every single one. I've never seen an instance where there isn't. And when they got to be so many climbers putting in these pitons and taking them out, it was destroying the cracks. It was making, a little crack this big suddenly was this big. And it was destroying the rock. And so I thought, I'm responsible for this, so I should do something about it. So then we came up with a different method of protection for climbing, where you take little aluminum chocks and just put them in with your fingers, pull them down, and they, in a little wedge in a crack, and turns out they were just as safe as pitons. But then try to convince people who are, pounding these pitons in with a 20-ounce hammer that they should rely on this with their lives. So then, I've always felt the only way to lead is by example. So myself and another guy went and climbed a multi-day route on El Capitan in Yosemite using no hammers, just putting these little things in to show the world that that you could get by with this. And so that was my first real experience in seeing that I was the cause and that maybe I was also the solution.
Mm-hmm. And that has been, the other thing that strikes me about that story is that you started out making products that people relied on for their lives. And that's got to have something to do with your firm insistence that quality is at the top of your list of priorities. Right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the problems that we're having as a society, as being an unsustainable society, I think can be solved through quality. When you're talking about employing people, technology is not going to employ people. It's going to destroy jobs. The more technology we have, the more robots we have, whatever it is, automated machines, it puts people out of work. And doesn't necessarily make the best product. And take agriculture, for instance. This industrial agriculture is feeding more people in the short term, but in the long term it's destroying millions of acres of cropland, it's polluting our planet, it's giving us food that is not as nutritious. And I think the solution in a lot of cases is what David Brower says, turn around and take a forward step. In other words, go back to labor-intensive organic agriculture, which employs people in meaningful work. I mean, I would much rather be picking fruit in an orchard than working at a computer all day myself. And so I think, for me, that's whenever I'm stuck with a business problem, the answer is always quality. Increase the quality. As opposed to a lot of businesses say, oh, our profits are down this year, decrease the quality, decrease the service, have our customer service move to India, put less people on the phone and have a longer waiting period, whatever it is. It's always decrease the quality. For me, the answer has been to increase the quality. And I think if we want to employ people in the world, we have to consume less, but consume better. In other words, make products that last a long time. They're multifunctional. One little part breaks down, you can repair it instead of throw the whole piece away, which is, all electronics now. You can't repair any of that stuff. I notice how they repair cars now. They take out entire units, throw them away, and put another unit in instead of repairing the unit. So, I could go on forever about quality, but I think that's the key to changing our society. I had a house built recently out of all recycled materials. We built it out of broken up sidewalks, actually. 28-inch thick walls. I never have to heat it, never have to cool it. It's like living in a cave. It's sort of ambient temperature that's comfortable, and it's built to last 200 years. And it costs more to build it, but it won't, you won't have to tear it down in 50 years and build another one and then another one.
Yeah. And there's no real reason that it shouldn't last more than 200 years either if people, if people maintain it as the years go by. Right?
Yeah, look at the old brewery over here where we have our Patagonia store. That thing was built, 18th century. So it's still standing, built out of rock, and that's fantastic, I think.
No reason you can't keep on forever. You talk about Patagonia. At one point you say that you think of Patagonia as an ecosystem, with its vendors and customers as an integral part of that system. That's a very different vision of a corporate structure. Right? But tell me how that works.
Well, I can say that our customers are very important to us because we do very little advertising, and so we rely on word of mouth from one customer telling another person about Patagonia. You know, on advertising, we spend 0.5% of sales on advertising. That's all. And so we feel like our customers are our friends, and then in our catalogs and stuff, we publish essays on trying to influence them to do the right thing as far as the environment goes. And what we're trying to do as a company is cause the least amount of harm in running a business. And in doing so, we want to influence other companies. So our mission statement is, you know, make the best product. So there's the quality part of it. Cause the least amount of harm. And that's the unintended consequences. In other words, educate ourselves so that we know what we're doing. And so we're not causing harm unintentionally or just through ignorance. And the last part is to use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. So that's the reasons why we're in business. And to do that, all of those things, is we have to make the best product, we have to cause the least amount of harm. Then the other part, the Zen master would say, the other part's going to happen. We are going to influence other companies. And in fact, we are. During the recession, this last recession, we grew 20, 25%, 30% every year, which is unusual for us. Normally we only grow very sustainably at 3 to 5%, because I don't want to have any, I want to be independent of the banks. So we've always grown very slowly. But in the recession, the demand for our goods shot up like crazy. Because in a recession, people become very conservative. They don't buy, things just because they're bored. They'll buy things they need, and they'll buy better quality. They'll last a long time. They'll buy a piece of clothing that's multifunctional. They'll buy a ski jacket that you can ski in, you can mountain climb in, you can put it over your suit in a city in a rainstorm. They won't buy a specific ski jacket that sits in your closet 10 months a year. So that's kind of the clothes that we make. And so it's kind of a holistic approach to business, where you're taking care of the damage that you do as much as you can, and you're involving your customer, and your customer is your best salesperson. And it all works so well that other companies are saying, what's going on with this Patagonia? I mean, look at them. They're a very successful company. They grew in a strong recession. Maybe we better think about doing some of the things that they're doing. So the last part of our mission statement is actually happening, where we are influencing other companies and governments as well. A few years ago, Walmart called us. I mean, Walmart's the 11th largest economy in the world. There's only 10 countries larger than the Walmart company. And they called us and said, we want to send some people out to see your company. So they sent, 7 or 9 people out, executives, to study what we were doing, because they had a mandate from the Walton family to green Walmart. And so they visited us, and we showed them around, and so that was the end of it, I thought. But then they called me about a year later and wanted me to come to Bentonville, Arkansas, to give a talk to 1,200 of their buyers for the company. And it was a little conference for their buyers, where they were going to announce that part of the buyers' jobs from now on is to buy greener products and work only with suppliers that are willing to work on making their product more sustainable. And so I gave a talk there, and one thing led to another, and then Walmart sent a letter out to 50 of the largest clothing companies in the world, and said, come to New York and talk about doing a sustainability index for clothing. Like, it's kind of like organic standards for food or something. Nobody came, not one. I mean, you know, Walmart's got this terrible reputation. So Walmart came to us and said, would you co-sign a letter signed by Walmart and Patagonia to come to this conference? And so we did. Everybody came. So I thought, oh my God, this little David and Goliath thing, you know. I always thought we were David, but now we're Goliath. So we started this sustainability index with, now we have about 50 companies that represent over 30% of the entire clothing and footwear sales in the world. These are all gigantic companies. And we're working on a sustainability index, so, which means, in brief, a couple of years from now, a customer can go into a department store and look at 5 brands of jeans on the table. And they can zap the barcode with whatever electronic gizmo they'll have a couple of years from now. And it'll tell them the whole history of those jeans. Where they're made, whether it's a sweatshop, whether it's a, you know, a responsible sewing factory, the fibers used in the jeans, whether they're organic cotton or non-organic cotton, whether they're polyester, whatever, it's going to have a rating, and that's the sustainability index. It'll have a rating on how responsibly those jeans were made, each pair. So now the customer, the consumer, now has a choice between buying responsibly or less responsibly. I mean, you know, and you know, jeans are jeans, pretty much. And so what it does, it suddenly gives power to consumers. Because, you know, when we talked about corporations causing all this damage in the world, well, why do they do that? It's because we're demanding them to do that. You know, we're demanding Canada exploit the tar sands because we want cheap petroleum. And you know, the government calls us consumers. We're not citizens, we're consumers. The stock market goes up and down according to how confident we are. And so, but citizens have a lot of power. I mean, you look at this Arab Spring. These are citizens taking down governments. They can take down governments, they can create governments. In fact, I believe that civil democracy is the strongest force in society. That's where everything happens. But as consumers, we're the problem. And because, you know, you look in Webster's, under consumer, it's one who uses up, who destroys. That's us. And so the Zen master would say, if you want to change government, don't focus on changing government. We're not going to change government. Focus on changing the corporations, because government is just a pawn of the corporations. But if you want to change the corporations, you got to change the consumers, and that's us. We're the problem. So if we can change, if we can make intelligent decisions on our purchasing, and if we can get into the habit of purchasing less, but purchasing better quality, we can change the corporations, and then government has to follow.
Isn't that where the Walmart thing starts? Was it consumer demand that made Walmart say we want to green our company?
No,
or?
I think it's the Walton family. Just sent it direct. They still own 40% of the stock or something, and they decided that they. Well, first of all, they saw profits in less packaging. They saw profits in turning all their trucks into more efficient engines, and so everything they did in the beginning was more profitable for them. They started recycling plastic, and which they normally only threw away, all their plastic packaging. Now they make millions of dollars in recycling the plastic. And if I was going to describe Walmart to somebody, Walmart would go to Crest toothpaste and say, get rid of the box. It does nothing. Consumer gets home, throws the box away, and it costs you more for that box. Figure it out. Yeah, okay, your toothpaste is going to roll off the shelf the way it's made now, but figure out a different. And when you figure it out, you're going to save money, and Walmart wants the savings.
Okay.
That's Walmart.
Okay. Not
But-
just a share of the savings.
But this sustainability index that we're creating can be used, can be modified slightly to be used for buying a lawnmower. It can be used for buying stocks, because what it does, it forces transparency all through the entire supply chain. So now when you buy a stock in a company, you have no idea what's going on in that company. Look how many smart people bought Enron stock. You have no idea. But you can read their corporate sustainability reports, and all it does, it tells you that they gave a few $1,000s to the symphony, and they eliminated some packaging, but you know, in reality, they really did it to save money. They don't talk about all the millions of acres of the Niger Delta that they're destroying, you know, or how many lawsuits they have because of pollution, and they don't say any of that stuff. So you don't know what's going on in a company. But I think if we can have full transparency in corporations, it'll change the world. It really will. Because I think the consumer, in the end, given enough information, will make the right decisions. I really do. The big difference, yeah, we are a corporation, but we're not a public corporation. And in fact, Robert Reich has written a book called Super Capitalism. He has 2 chapters that basically says why public corporations can never be responsible, period. Their sole mandate is to maximize profits for the shareholders, and they can't give their attitude is give the shareholders the profits and then let them, if they want to give their money to charity or whatever, let them do it. But it shouldn't happen at the corporate level. And I'm saying that's wrong. And being a private corporation, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to answer to stockholders. I don't have to. So it gives. I have a lot more power as the owner of a little small corporation than the president of General Motors. Yeah, we've been out of debt for several years, and I don't want to have to deal with bankers. I don't want to have bankers. The deeper you go in the debt with the bank, the more they tell you what to do. And so to do what I'm doing, to be a free man, basically, and do whatever I want with the company, it has to remain private. You know, there's only 4,000 public companies in the United States.
Really?
I had no idea how few there were.
No, nor I.
And, you know, the whole Wall Street world revolves around these 4,000 companies. It's amazing. And yet all these little private companies are really the backbone of the country.
Every aspect of Patagonia follows that same set of values, right? So tell me a little bit about what it's like for somebody to work at Patagonia and who the people are that you hire, because I think that's a big piece of this too, isn't it?
The title of my first book, which is Let My People Go Surfing, it means that our corporate headquarters are within walking distance of some surfing beaches in California. So I've always been involved in a lot of different sports, and basically when there's a lot of powder snow comes during the night, you should be allowed to just go and ski powder, no matter whether you have a job or not. And for us, if you want to be a serious surfer, you don't go surfing next Thursday at 2 o'clock. You go when the surf comes up. So you have to have a job that allows you to do that. And so we've always had that philosophy. And so it means that for that to work, you have to hire very independent, self-motivated people. And then you leave them alone. And so, like I've been on the road a lot fishing this whole summer, and I haven't called back to the company once. No, even if the place burns down, why call me? You know what to do. And so I had a psychologist come and this is years ago, do a study of our people at Patagonia. He said, look, I gotta tell you, these are the most independent people I've ever seen in a company. They're so independent, they're actually unemployable. Because they're, to get them to work in a team, you have to build consensus. It's kind of like the Native Americans. The chief of the tribe was not the richest person in the tribe. He was the best orator. And they would sit down and build, his job was to build consensus within the tribe. And I can't say that that's my job, but that's the CEO's job, really. Because to get a lot of independent people working together, they all have to believe that it's the right thing to do. And once they see a particular direction, and they're all going in one direction, things get done. I mean, look at the United States right now. We got all these blue states and red states. We're never going to agree on anything. The best we can ever come up with is a compromise where we cut the baby in half, that Solomon story. And compromise doesn't solve the problem. It's neither here nor there. There's a right way, there's a wrong way. There's no gray way to solve a problem. So we get all these independent people all going in one direction, and then I leave them alone. And it works phenomenally well. But I've had companies come in to study what we're doing, and they see this let my people go surfing policy, which means you want to work at home one day because your kid is sick? Fine, go work at home. I don't care. All I care is the work is done. And they think, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do that. I say, forget it. You can't do it. It's not going to work. You can't have an existing company suddenly change over to that. You have to begin with the very first person you hire. Otherwise, you get people that will take advantage of that policy. And if they don't feel like they're truly part of the company, and they're working there for the right reasons, they'll abuse it. They'll go to the hairdresser instead of going surfing or taking care of their sick child.
Yeah. And in order to keep these highly individual people, you also offer a whole range of things that no other company that I can think of would imagine. I mean, you've got a raptor rescue operation within the company. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we bring in injured raptors. We bring in over 1,000 a year. We have a little facility that I have employees volunteer to kill rats and feed them to the raptors, and we have to raise mice and rats to feed them, and we have a veterinarian that does pro bono work for us, and will reset wings, and then we release the birds back into the wild. I mean, that's just one of the things that I used to be the rat killer, actually. When we first started out, the women wouldn't kill the rats, so they used to call me every couple of days, and I'd go over and kill rats. But now these women grab a rat by the tail and whap it on.
That takes you back to the beginning, doesn't it? Because one of the places that you started getting involved with the mountains was when you started getting involved with falconry as a very young boy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, falconry was a very important lesson for me. I've kind of been a student of Zen philosophy all my life, where you know, you basically work on the process and the solution will just come along. Or, you know, in business, if you ask me what our profits were last year or what they're going to be this year, you know what? I have no idea. I couldn't care less. I just know that the process is growing well for us this year, and we will be profitable. Instead of focusing on the process, instead of focusing on the end product, the profits, what you'll do is you'll compromise your way. And so when we first wanted to put in a child care center, we were only one in, I think there was 150 in the United States, corporate child care centers. And I had 70-something% women working there, and I didn't want to lose them. So my wife came up with the idea of putting in a child care center. Well, the accountants are going to tell you that, oh no, you can't do that. This is a huge drain on the company. Your profits will go down, blah, blah, blah. They don't see the externalities of what's going on there. The fact that to get a new employee often costs you $50,000 in headhunter costs, training, inefficiencies in the beginning. And so it turns out that having a child care center is a profit center. And, but that's something that they don't teach you in business school.
Right. But a profit center, because essentially it allows you to keep the best employees and for them to be as productive as possible, because they're not worried about their kids. Their kids are right there where they can see them.
Yeah. We not only have a child care center, we have an after-school program where we send a van out and pick up kids at school and bring them back to the company, and then they have a play yard where they hang out until their parents get out of work at 5 o'clock.
And there's something good about kids seeing his parent at work.
Oh, you know, these kids that come out of our child care center are the best product we produce. They're unbelievable. Normally, you see a kid that's been raised at home by a mother who's been fired because she's pregnant, and she plugs him into the television all day, and you see the kid and the mother, and you say hello to the kid, and he hides behind the mother's skirt. Our kids, you walk in there and you say, hi kids, they'll go over and shake hands with you. They've been raised by the village, and they're so confident, it's incredible. And they have a sense of reality about them that is very unusual. I walked into our child care center a few years ago, and I said, hi guys, how's school coming? And they said, we're not at school, we're at work. My parents work over there, we work over here. That was pretty amazing for me to see that.
It's a wonderful outcome, and they have a relationship with work. They know what it is, they know what it involves, they think it can be agreeable, interesting, right?
They go and they force their parents to recycle things. I mean, they're teaching their parents in a lot of cases. And they've been handled by many different people, and they're ready to join society. And when they go to a school afterwards, public school, the teachers all say they're the best kids in class.
Well, I think when you say raised by the village, boy, that rings a bell with me, because I lived for 35 years in a village and saw how that actually works, raised a kid in a village. And he would come in when he was 4, he'd be out wandering, and he'd come into the boat shop where we were building a boat, and we'd say, you want some lunch? He'd say, no thanks, I ate at Mary's. And he had this sense of the community as being kind of like a whole environment for